Welcome to the session sheet in Central Reach. This is where you'll be able to see your client's current goals, record data, and communicate with your supervisor and other team members. I will guide you through using the session sheet in every type of data collection that you might see in the field. On the screen, we have a sample of what a data sheet will look like on your phone. When you arrive at a client's home, start the session timer by pressing the button that says Restart Session in the top left corner of your screen. Now that we have started the timer, we can begin exploring the contents of the left tab. Here in the left tab, you will see the name of the session sheet. Some clients may have different data sheets for different settings, so make sure you are using the correct one. Below this is the pause button, the graph all button, and the stop button. We will revisit these later. Now we have the session timer indicating how long our current session has been. Under this is a list of all the client information, communication logs, and goals in the sheet. First, we will explore the communication log section. Start by selecting the BT communication log, sometimes labeled as team communication log. Here you will be able to access previous session notes and write new ones. The example here includes a sample description of what should be in your daily session notes. While in the communication log, select the Comments tab. Here you will be able to review notes from previous sessions and write new ones. It is a good habit, especially if you share a case with another behavior technician, to start by reviewing previous session notes to get a better understanding of your client's progress. While in the Comments page, select the text box to add a comment. Here you will be able to type in your daily session notes. In my example, I am welcoming you to ALP, but your notes will be longer and more detailed than this. When you are done, hit Enter to save your note and hit X to close out this page. Next, we will move over to the Supervisor Communication Log. This is where your supervisor will write notes to the team for you to review while you are with your client. When you are done reading the notes, hit the check button next to the comment to indicate that you have read it. Hit the X button at the top right corner of the pop-up window to close this out. Next up on our tour is the BIP, or Behavior Intervention Plan. In this sample, I have listed some of the things that are included in behavior intervention plans. Here you will find the name of a targeted behavior, its definition, the function, and strategies designed to modify this behavior. Here is a sample BIP for elopement that is filled out. This page will contain all of the information that you need, courtesy of your supervisor, to understand and manage your client's behavioral needs. Read it closely and never be afraid to ask questions about anything that isn't clear. You can also switch to the Comment tab in the pop-up window to add comments directly to your supervisor for questions you have, or you can ask them in person when they come to support you in the field. Let's finish exploring the right tab together. Here you can scroll up and down the list to see all of the client's current targets and goals. If you select a target, it will expand to show you the name of the long-term goal that this target is connected to. In our example here, our targets are named after the types of data collections that they represent, but your client's targets will be much clearer and more specific to the goals that you are working on. You can also group targets by goals by selecting Tree View to see all the targets that are related to each other. By selecting the goal you want to explore, it will expand to reveal all the targets connected to that goal. That will wrap up our overview of the left tab for now, but we will return here again at the end to talk about recording session notes and graphing our data. Select the arrow in the top right corner to minimize the pop-up window and reveal your client's session sheet. Scroll to the top of the session sheet to take a closer look at each data collection type. In our first example, we have % independent data. This data collection format is one of the most commonly seen in Central Reach. Notice that as the data block is selected, it glows lighter. The elements of the data block include the eyeball button, which is used for expanding and contracting the view of the data block, the name of the target, the current intervention phase. This current example is in baseline. The second row displays the current trial, as well as the back trial button and the forward trial button. The third row is where the data is collected. This will change depending on what type of data collection is needed for this target. The line and circle at the bottom of the data block show the current performance and percentage of data collected so far. You can see that as I select each trial, the data percentage will change along with the current trial number. In this example, IND means independent, NR means no response, and ERR means error. This sample is set to a maximum of 10 trials, which was manually set by the supervisor. Only independent responses are marked as correct in the sample, as you can see reflected as the percentage changes below. You can also review the data you have collected so far by using the previous trial and next trial buttons. By selecting the eyeball button in the top left corner of the data block, you can expand to view all the data collected so far. You can select and deselect data in this view to make edits or changes to your data that you've collected. You can also hit the eyeball button again to minimize back to the regular view. Now, let's explore the right tab together to learn even more about this target. Press the right tab button as seen here to expand the pop-out window and view more information. Here you will find information on your target such as the 3 most recently graphed data points, the current intervention phase, the graph target button, and information on current data collected. We will graph all the targets together at the end, but here you will also have the option to graph targets individually. When we press the graph button, the data records and the target turns green to reflect that it was saved. Let's open the tab again to look at the graph of the data we recorded. We can close this out, record more data, and graph again. The data is reflected immediately in our graph. We will explore the graph target button again soon. Moving further down the right tab, we can find very important information on the target we are working on. Here we can find a description of the current target, how to collect data, how to work on this goal, and instructional notes and materials needed to target it. Please read this section very closely, as it will contain everything you need to know for the goal that you are working on. Your supervisors are hard at work putting everything you need for each target right here for you. But if anything is missing or unclear, you can always ask your supervisor for help or scroll all the way to the bottom to drop a comment about any goal or target. The supervisor will see this comment and will be able to answer your questions and update the description to make them as clear as possible. Here's a sample of the comment to see what it looks like. Your supervisor can check them off as read after they are addressed. To move back to the main session sheet, scroll up to the top of the right tab and select the right tab icon again to minimize it. Back on the main session sheet, we can scroll down to take a look at the next goal. Here you will see that this goal is an intervention and has an option to mark this goal as prompted. The description in the right tab will indicate if the supervisor has set the prompts to count as correct or incorrect responses. The supervisor will set this manually depending on the needs of the program. Looking back at the right tab, we can also see that the red graph target button has disappeared and has been replaced by a sentence that says that a minimum of 10 trials must be recorded before this goal can be graphed. Please check this for every goal, as your supervisor will often set a minimum data requirement for goals to meet the requirements of the intervention for this client. As you enter data and see the percentage change, you will also easily be able to tell if your prompts were counted as correct or incorrect. In this case, as indicated in the title of the sample target, the prompts are all counted as incorrect responses. Once we have entered the minimum of 10 trials required to graph this target, we can open the right tab and we will see that the graph target button has reappeared. Continuing down the session sheet, we have some examples of generalization and maintenance phases. The pictured examples are all from the same goal and illustrate different phases of this goal. Center Reach can be set up to show a goal in one phase and automatically change the phase when a certain data criterion is met. It will all show as one target, changing over time, rather than a list of targets in different phases as shown in this example. Next on our list, we have a different type of data collection called %correct. This data type uses a check to indicate correct and an X to indicate incorrect responses. This data type is used when a supervisor wants to separate prompt codes and data from whether or not a response was correct or incorrect, rather than being tied together as it is in % independence. In our baseline sample here, You can see that when selected, it works very similarly to %independent. Check is correct and X is incorrect. It can even be expanded with the eyeball button like before. Below this, we have a prompt code for full physical prompts. Read the description to learn how and when this prompt should be used. A common use case is an errorless learning in which the prompt is provided at the same time as the instruction on every trial. To record data on this, select the prompt button to make it display a plus sign, then record whether or not the client was correct or incorrect after the prompt was provided. Since it would be unlikely to get an incorrect response using a full physical prompt, let's move down to see an example of a partial physical prompt. When a partial physical prompt is provided, it can still be possible to get an incorrect response. So in this case, we would select the partial physical prompt to indicate that it was provided, then select the X to indicate that the response was incorrect. Even though the prompt was provided, we can also see an example of providing the prompt and getting a correct response here. A more complex example here contains multiple prompts. This is often used when fading prompts. A supervisor may ask that the least intrusive prompt is counted as correct, and a more intrusive prompt is provided as needed but then marked as incorrect. To show this in our data, we can select the less intrusive prompt twice. In this example, positional prompt. It will show as a plus, then a minus. This will mean that the prompt was provided and the client did not respond with this prompt. Then, a gesture prompt is selected to show a plus. Then the X is selected to mark it as an incorrect response, since the current phase of positional prompt did not lead to a correct response. Read the descriptions carefully, as your supervisor will guide you through this if this type of data is needed. When utilizing %correct data, it is possible to list specific generalization criterion. This example contains people as different generalization criterion. Simply select the family member that you are targeting the skill with, then add data accordingly. As with the other goals we've seen so far, this data block can be expanded using the eyeball button for real-time data analysis. Below this is an example of generalization by location. This is the same as when generalizing with people, except that each generalization criterion will represent a location. In this example, we were at the park. We could press park, then record a response, then press park again, then record the next response. Continue with this as long as you are generalizing skills at the park. Now we will be moving away from percentage data towards a variety of other data collection types. The first one here is one of the most simple. It is for recording frequency data. This counts the number of a given response or behavior that occurs throughout the session. Hit the plus button to add a number. Hit the minus button to subtract one. You can also select the value in the middle to manually type in a number. Frequency is typically used to record the total number of occurrences throughout the session, so it is most often used as a measure of behavioral data. Behavior data is often meant to be collected throughout the full session, so to make it easy to access no matter where you are in the datasheet, it is stored in the pinned section. This section is accessed by pressing the push pin symbol at the bottom of the screen. Often, this section is already shown when you first access the session sheet, and you will not need to press the pin if it is not minimized. Data collected here is the same as in other parts of the datasheet, except that it is shown at the bottom no matter where you scroll throughout the other targets. Here, frequency can be recorded in the same way as before. By scrolling horizontally along the bottom, we can see other pinned data blocks. This brings us to our next data collection type, duration data. Duration data records the amount of time a targeted behavior occurs. To record duration data, simply press the play button at the beginning of the behavior. Then let the timer run and press the stop button to pause the timer. You can then record your duration data using the red graph target button in the right tab. Here we graphed 10 seconds. Back down in the pinned section is an example of pinned duration data. This works the same way as before. Start the timer, then hit the stop button when the behavior ends. While selected on this data block, you can also open the right tab and graph the data. Just as with frequency data, duration data can also be entered manually by selecting the numbers and entering a time value. It can then be played, paused, and reset as usual from there. Rate data records frequency over time. This works by starting the timer, then recording a frequency value. This might be used for something like recording the number of hand flaps a client makes in a 10-minute period. In this example, I recorded 5 instances in a 10-second time period. Based on the interval that the supervisor set the data to record at, the computer will extrapolate this information for the full time interval. For example, 5 occurrences in 10 seconds is the same as 1 every 2 seconds. So if the supervisor set the rate data to calculate per hour, then the computer system will automatically assume that the client continued to engage in this behavior at a constant rate and will list the data at 30 times per hour. Because of this, it is important to pay close attention to the timer when collecting rate data, and it is important to make sure that the timer is running for the full duration of the time that you are intending to record frequency. When rate data is intended to be collected for the whole session, you will see that the rate timer starts and stops with the session timer. In this example, both the rate timer and the session timer read 15 minutes and 7 seconds. They are linked together to help to reduce mistakes in the way that rate data is recorded. In this example, the data point shows 5 occurrences in 15 minutes. Rate data works the same way in the pinned section as seen in the example below. The next data block is an example of task analysis data. Task analysis data is used to record performance and prompt fading on large and complex multi-step tasks such as brushing your teeth or tying your shoes. Instead of trials, each data point is a step of the skill. When you reach the end of the task analysis, instead of progressing to the next step, it will stay on the last step in which you recorded data. This is your cue to open the right tab and graph the data. Once graphed, we may check the data, then minimize the right tab when you are done. This allows it to be reset so you can collect another set of data for the targeted steps. Similarly to previous data types, clicking the eyeball button expands the data block. In the case of a task analysis, it expands to reveal all the steps that are being taught. You can record data in the expanded view, then graph again. The next task analysis is an example of one that contains prompts. Data on this is recorded similarly to how it is in % independent for each of the steps. Your supervisor can adjust settings to determine whether prompts count as correct or incorrect, depending on the needs of the client and the intervention. In this example, all of the prompts count as correct responses, and only no response or error decreases the client's score. Let's graph this and continue on to time sampling. Time sampling data looks similar to rate, but functions very differently. When you start the timer, it will count and display time within a given interval. The check and X buttons are used to mark whether or not the targeted behavior occurred during the current interval. The system makes a beep sound, coming up now. This beep sound helps you to know when an interval has ended and the next one is starting. In the middle of the data block, it will indicate the current interval in which data is being recorded. When I select the data point, it advances the interval automatically. Ideally, you should be recording data on the interval that has just ended. Rate data in the pinned section works the same way, but the view of what you can see is condensed to fit better in the pinned section down below. Next, we will discuss rating scale data. In order to use rating scale data, you need to start by reading the description to see what meaning the supervisor has assigned to each value. In our sample description, for example, I have listed 3 possible scenarios. Each number in the rating scale is assigned a meaning. This is most often used for measurements of magnitude, intensity, or quality. From our example here, let's use the magnitude scale for elopement to measure that the client eloped 50 or more feet away from the classroom. In our definition list, this is indicated by a number 2 on our scale. Simply minimize the right tab, select the corresponding number 2, then reopen the tab to select the graph target button. We can see here that this graphed a 2 to indicate that our client ran 50 or more feet away. Down below in the pin section, you can select the desired number bubble and graph in the same way. Now that we have seen all the different data types that you will encounter, we can scroll up and down this list to view all of our clients' goals, record data, graph, and view progress as you go. You can record data on multiple things at a time and access the pin whenever needed. When you are done recording data for our whole session, we can return to the left tab. This is where you will add your daily session notes and discuss client progress and performance on all the goals targeted that day. When you are done with your notes, close this out by selecting the X in the top right of the pop-up window. Finally, we will select the Graph All button. This will bring up a pop-up window where you can review all the data about to be graphed. This data will be divided into 3 sections for review before graphing. The Targets with Data Collected section will be ready to be graphed. The checkboxes are for selecting whether or not you want to graph this target. We can scroll through this list to see all the graphable targets. The Select All box can be used to select or deselect all targets from this list. Below this is a list of targets that cannot be graphed yet. Targets get sorted into this list when there is either no data to graph or the minimum threshold for number of trials for this target that was set by the supervisor has not yet been met. As you can see, percent independent with error correction had some data, but not enough to be usable, so the data collected will get discarded unless more trials are recorded before the end of the session. The final section is where you will find frequency, duration, and rating scale data that can be graphed as a 0 when appropriate. This is used when a client did not engage in any instances of a target behavior for a whole session, and we need to graph that 0 of these behaviors occurred. Your supervisor can set these 0 data points to graph automatically, but there may be some rare scenarios where you will need to do this manually. When you are all done reviewing your data and targets, select the red Graph All and End Session button to close out your session, graph all data, and end the session timer. When you do this, you are all done and have successfully completed a session in Central Reach.